Good morning. I'm Omar Garcia, Chief External Affairs Officer at the Port of Corpus Christi, and I'm honored to serve as your Master of Ceremonies for Texas Energy Day. Today's event will focus on managing our energy resources in a COVID-19 world. We will hear from our distinguished Texas delegation, along with energy executives, debating the future of oil and gas and the role it will play in our recovery, along with future policy decisions in DC and how they will impact our industry. Our agenda for today will include remarks from Senators Cornyn and Senator Cruz, Congresswoman Lizzie Fletcher, Congressman Cloud, and Congressman Cuellar. In addition, we will hear from Port of Corpus Christi CEO Sean Strawbridge and Port of Houston CEO Roger Gunther. We will have two panel discussions. The first panel, entitled A View from the Ground, will feature the following: Christopher Smith, Senior Vice President of Policy for Cheniere, Khalid Musla, Executive Vice President at Buckeye, Beau Mccall, CEO of Mota Midstream, and Todd Staples, CEO of the Texas Oil and Gas Association, better known as TXOGA. This panel will be moderated by Sean Strawbridge. Our second panel will focus on the view from the Beltway and will feature Chet Thompson, President and CEO of the American Fuel and Petrochemical Manufacturers, Jeff Morehouse, Senior Director in Government Affairs for ClearPath, Charlie Riedel, Vice President of the Natural Gas Supply Association and Executive Director, Center for LNG. This panel will be moderated by Anthony Adragna with Politico. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items. Audience members can submit questions to panelists. Please submit your questions via Zoom. We will answer them based on the availability of time. And secondly, please note that we will be recording this event. At this time, I would like to introduce Chairman Zahn to provide welcome remarks. Chairman Zahn is in his 5th year as chairman of the Port of Corpus Christi. He is a big advocate for the Port of Corpus and has been very instrumental in securing federal funds for our channel improvement project. Welcome, Chairman Zahn.
Thank you. The Port of Corpus Christi, its commission and staff welcome each one of you to this webinar on managing the critical importance of energy in America in a COVID-19 world. We're pleased to be hosting this seminar. We are the energy port of the Americas, and as such realize the importance of energy to the economy, not only in Texas, but in the nation. We know that energy will play a huge part in bringing the economy of this country back to where it was pre-COVID. We're extremely pleased that distinguished members of Congress have agreed to be a part of this webinar. They are so important to the success of the energy sector and its importance to the economy of this nation. We appreciate their continued support to our industry, especially during these difficult times. We're also grateful for the speakers and panelists. They are leaders in our industry and will provide useful insight into how industry will play a significant role in our nation's economic recovery. Again, on behalf of the Port of Corpus Christi, I welcome you to our conference and thank you for your participation.
Thank you, Chairman Zahn. We greatly appreciate all the support you provide to the Port of Corpus Christi and for all that you do. At this time, I would like to introduce Sean Strawbridge, CEO of the Port of Corpus Christi. Sean joined the port in 2015 and ascended to the CEO position in 2018. In a short amount of time, Sean has managed to advance milestone projects that will alter the economic landscape of the region for years to come. Sean, welcome to Texas Energy Day.
Thank you, Omar, and good morning to all, and welcome to our webinar, Managing the Critical Importance of Energy in America in a COVID-19 World. We are honored to have such a distinguished group of speakers, including members of our federal delegation from Texas and our energy industry titans that you will hear from later this morning. A special thank you all for participating and for your support of Texas Energy. Today's participants include leaders of energy industry associations, pipeline operators, midstream companies, refining and petrochemical manufacturers, natural gas exporters, and port authorities, all of which are essential to our recovery as demand for U.S. crude oil and natural gas eventually returns. I'd also like to extend a special thank you to our co-sponsors, the American Fuel and Petrochemical Manufacturers Association, the Natural Gas Supply Association, and ClearPath. Finally, a special thank you to all of you who are out there attending this event. I'm hopeful that you will find today's discussion thought-provoking, insightful, and informative as we deliberate the Texas economy in a post-COVID-19 world. As the largest producer of American energy, Texas is so important to our national economy and our national security via our energy independence. As the world emerges from its COVID cocoon, what better time than now to assemble this incredible panel of business and political leaders to discuss their views on policies and strategies designed to preserve the health of the oil and gas sector and create much needed jobs here in Texas. As the Chinese military strategist Sun Tzu famously wrote in The Art of War, "In the midst of chaos, there is also opportunity." Today, we will be discussing emerging opportunities in a post-COVID-19 world. This includes managing the cadence of energy production versus consumption and the opportunities to bring what has otherwise been unprecedented, to bring order to what has otherwise been unprecedented global economic destruction. In the coming decade, we expect the United States to become yet again a net exporter of its energy production. To keep pace with a recovering global demand, Texas ports are expanding infrastructure to position Texas for success, both today and into the future. Today, we will hear from the nation's largest and second largest ports, the Port of Houston and the Port of Corpus Christi, on what we are doing to support Texas and our recovery. Areas of opportunity we will discuss today include emerging federal policies from the champions of these policies themselves, your Texas Senators, John Cornyn and Ted Cruz, as well as Congressman Henry Cuellar, Congresswoman Lizzie Fletcher, and Corpus Christi's very own Congressman Michael Cloud. To each of you, we thank you for your passion to represent the people of Texas and for your leadership. You know, Texas produces nearly 10% of the national GDP, creating millions of jobs and contributing over nearly $2 trillion in annual GDP. While Texas is the #1 producer of oil and gas in the nation, we also have 30% of the nation's refining capacity and 75% of the nation's petrochemical production. While Texas job growth still outpaces the nation in 2020, its largest sector, oil and gas, has been particularly hard hit by the demand destruction caused by the novel coronavirus. Today, we will hear ideas on how we can return the sector to a healthy state. Texas is also the nation's largest exporting state. Its ports account for 20% of all U.S. exports and provide tremendous economic vitality for Texas, with over 25% of Texas GDP directly tied to Texas ports and its navigable waterways. In these extraordinary times, we have seen energy prices drop to their lowest levels in a decade or more. And last month, WTI traded at minus $40 a barrel. While this was more the Wall Street mechanics of futures contracts unwinding, the fact that oil traded in negative territory for the first time ever signals a major upset in what are otherwise normal markets. Much of this market imbalance was caused obviously by the pandemic, but we've also seen some undisciplined producing nations such as Saudi Arabia and Russia exacerbate an already abysmal situation. Now, the markets will bounce back, and some of that we're seeing already today. But as we move into economic recovery, we must be ready to respond in real time and with a never-before sense of urgency and nimbleness designed to put politics and bureaucracy aside, instead taking action that truly moves the needle towards saving both lives and livelihoods. Folks, we're Texans and we are tough. We are proud, we're innovative, and we are certainly resilient. It is this Constitution that has allowed us to energize the state and the nation for decades past, and we will again for decades to come. Thank you, and now let's start the event. Omar, back to you.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you for that eloquent speech, and thank you for kicking off this great event. At this time, I would like to welcome Senator Cornyn. Senator Cornyn has served in the United States Senate for nearly 2 decades and was instrumental in securing a very important piece of land at Ingleside from the Navy in the mid-2000s. That critical acquisition of land jump-started the phenomenal energy growth the Port of Corpus Christi has been experiencing. Senator Cornyn, welcome to Texas Energy Day.
Well, thank you, Omar, and thanks to the Port of Corpus Christi for organizing this call and to everybody on the call. I appreciate the chance, along with my congressional colleagues, to spend a few minutes talking to you. I'd rather be there in person rather than visiting you by Zoom, but I'll look forward to seeing you again in person soon. First, a quick update about what we've been doing in Washington. I can't remember any event in my lifetime that has had as big an impact on both the physical and economic health of our country as this COVID-19 virus. And I know this has been a double whammy for the Texas energy sector. Not only, as Sean said, have we seen demand drop precipitously as the world economies have shut down. We've also seen the Saudis and the Russians flood the market with cheap oil. And while Senator Cruz and I and other senators sent a very firm message to the Crown Prince that if he depended on us for votes for the Saudi-U.S. alliance, especially when it comes to security, then he needed to think again about treating his ally this way. Fortunately, the administration was able to negotiate with OPEC a reduction in production, but we still know that demand is the biggest problem in this world economy. So we have done what we needed to do, I believe, so far in dealing with public health issues. We've tried to help bolster our hospitals, many of which declined or deferred elective surgery, which is how they pay the bills, so they could be ready for a potential surge of COVID-19 patients. We've done our part as individuals by exercising good personal hygiene and social distancing and using our own personal protective equipment, masks, when we can't maintain that distancing. But obviously, masks and gloves and other PPE have been critical for our frontline healthcare workers and law enforcement and others that have no choice but to go to work every day, and thank goodness for them. We also tried to throw an economic lifeline to the people who, through no fault of their own, found themselves without an income by both direct financial help and also enhanced unemployment insurance benefits. But the star of the show, so to speak, particularly the CARES Act that passed the Senate in late March, was the Paycheck Protection Program. We initially funded this with $350 billion. The goal of this was to try to encourage employers to maintain their payroll, that is, keep their employees on their payroll until at least June, as another way of mitigating the harsh impact on individual workers. And we did this through low interest loans. It could be used to cover everything from payroll to rent. And if they did maintain their payroll until June, employers would be able to see these loans completely forgiven. Needless to say, it was a popular program. We burned out of money in 2 weeks, and we replenished that with another $320 billion thereafter. But I want you to know we're also working with the administration on the establishment of this Main Street lending facility that Congress authorized, and hopefully that will provide some additional relief for the energy sector. I know President Trump and Secretary Mnuchin and Secretary Brulette are very tuned in to the damage that's been done to our energy sector, and they are committed, as are we, to making sure that we get through this together until that demand improves. So I want to make sure that you know that you can call on us as we contemplate the next installment of legislation. As you know, we've already spent roughly $3+ trillion. And I think right now we are tapping the brakes a little bit to make sure that what we've already done is working as intended. And obviously when you do something this big and this fast, there are going to be some mistakes, there are going to be some gaps. And I'm interested in making sure we fill those. We also are going to insist on liability protection for every business that follows public health guidelines. Much as we did following Y2K or leading up to the Y2K issue and post 9/11. But just like the challenges we faced from Hurricane Harvey, we are going to get through this together. And today, I'm happy to announce that we were able to get an additional $1.2 million for the Port of Corpus Christi to repair the Pelican Island breakwater structure damaged during that storm. So that's to the credit of the entire Texas delegation, no matter whether we're Republicans or Democrats. When it comes to Texas, we are a part of Team Texas. And it's an honor to represent you in the Senate along with my colleagues here today. And thanks for giving me the chance to share a few thoughts with you. And God bless you all and stay safe.
Thank you, Senator Cornyn. We greatly appreciate your continued support. Can't thank you enough for all you've done for the state of Texas, and please stay safe during the COVID-19 times. Next on the agenda, we have Representative Michael Cloud. While this may be Representative Cloud's first term in Congress, he's been a tremendous ally for the Port of Corpus Christi. So much so that he has gone to bat for us on Air Force One, briefing President Trump on our channel improvement project. Congressman Cloud, we thank you for everything you've done for this region, and welcome to Texas Energy Day.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be with you today. Thank you for hosting this event. It's a great event, wonderful idea. Thank you, Senator Cornyn, for your thoughts. And I will not just reiterate everything he said, but certainly it's been great to work as the Texas delegation to make sure that Texas is put first, the Texas coast is advanced, and it's so key to what's going on. We've had a lot really to celebrate over the last few years, from the first shipment of crude leaving the Port of Corpus Christi overseas. We've seen the shale revolution that's led to the transition from an energy dependent nation to an energy dominant nation, which of course meant jobs for millions of people and the strengthening of our place in the geopolitical landscape. Had the privilege to be on the South Lawn as the USMCA agreement was signed, and all that means for the state of Texas, with, you know, in our district, 40% of the jobs coming from US and Mexico, related to what's going on in I should say, in Canada and Mexico. A lot has happened here. And of course, here at the Port of Corpus Christi, had the privilege of working with you guys and to get the first tranche of funding for the expansion that's going on there, the deepening and widening of the port. It's been exciting to see the funding continue, and kudos to the whole Texas delegation for supporting that effort as well. And of course, the latest news is the president allocating another $100 million, of course, to be included in the budget proposal for fiscal year 2021. Of course, today we find ourselves in truly challenging and unprecedented times. And I know we keep using that word unprecedented, but I think it is an accurate word for where we're at. You know, I can tell you, when I went to Congress, I never imagined I'd be voting for a $2.2 trillion bill, spending over $3 trillion over the course of weeks. But really, that's what was required in this situation. If you consider that about 4 to 6 weeks of our GDP is about $2 trillion, and you consider the way that this bill was put in place. Of course, not everything's perfect. No bill in Congress ever is, but in the sense that the way the PPP program was set up and the different provisions for assisting healthcare and such, really designed in a way to hopefully be a bridge as best as possible to keep the essential elements of our economy intact, so that as we get through this season, hopefully we'll be able to get back to work and to ramp things up. And so been happy to support that and the reauthorization of the PPP program when that came. Of course, we're looking at what's next. As the senator said, we still have authorized a lot of money that hasn't gotten to the economy yet. So it's important to understand that that's still happening. The money's still being dispersed, and us looking at what needs to be done to move ahead is extremely important. When it comes to U.S. energy, of course, as Sean Strawbridge said, what Saudi Arabia and Russia did for a little while there in the midst of the demand being so low was really not called for, and very disappointing. And thankfully, the Trump administration has negotiated a cut in production to kind of stabilize prices. Of course, he's talked about filling the strategic petroleum reserve. We understand, of course, that'd be helpful. It's unfortunate that didn't make it into the very first bill. It was in there, and unfortunately, it didn't make it in still working on that. Of course, that's not going to solve the problem. That's of course going to help, but as far as what needs to happen, really we got to get people working again, and that's the solution as best as possible, to open up the economy responsibly, get people moving, get people going to work, and that's really what's going to be the long-term solution that fixes some of these systemic things. Of course, in our office, we've been working over the last few weeks to help people be informed and aware of the process going on. And like the senator mentioned, anytime you put programs up that are that quick, there's going to be some hiccups along the way. There was an understanding that it wasn't going to be perfect, but the need to err on the side of getting money into the economy quickly rather than perfectly. And so we've not only worked to get information out to those who would benefit, but also to provide that feedback loop. And we've seen the administration be very responsive in addressing those issues as they came up. And so that's some of the good news that's happening. Of course, in a crisis, you see the best of America as people are able to come together, work across the aisle to care for people. And we've seen a lot of that right now, and so that's really good. Going forward, of course, one of the big things on the that's really a concern right now is supply chains, national security, dealing with all those issues. I think there's a lot of bipartisan understanding that we need to take these issues seriously, and we of course know that energy is so important. Whatever the comeback story looks like, energy is going to be a huge part of it, and America must stay on the forefront of that. We know, of course, the Port of Corpus Christi, what I'm proud to represent, has been a big part of that, exporting most crude, second most LNG in any port. We're proud of all our Texas coast, but we have to work to continue to finish this channel improvement project and make sure that it's finished so that we can continue to maintain the U.S. position as a world leader. And so there's challenging times ahead. There's exciting times ahead. But the thing that I know is that we can do this. We can do this. And I believe that the U.S. can be and will continue to be a shining city on the hill for the rest of the world. Our founders actually believed and understood that it wasn't an accident that we were placed here with natural resources. And that was part of our kind of mandate as a nation, to be a shining city on a hill for freedom. And so I want to say thank you to you all who are involved in the energy industry. And I know times are tough right now, but I know that we have the grit necessary to see through this. Texans come together and work to see this happen. And so as we look forward, whatever the recovery looks like, we know it's going to take U.S. energy, trade, it's going to take our ports. And so we're happy to be a part of that story and to work with all of you in seeing that happen. So thank you so much. It's a privilege to be with you today. God bless.
Thank you, Representative Cloud. And I want to wish you a happy birthday. Somebody texted that to me while you were speaking. So happy birthday today, sir.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Have a great day. And thank you again for all you do for the South Texas and the state of Texas. At this time, I would like to introduce Representative Lizzie Fletcher. This is Representative Fletcher's first term in Congress as well, and she serves on the House committee in charge of authorizing channel improvement projects for construction. With Representative Fletcher's leadership, we hope Congress will pass another water resources and development bill this year, so a project like ours and the Port of Houston's can provide for safe, efficient vessel passage. Representative Fletcher, welcome to Texas Energy Day.
Thanks so much. I am glad to be with you this morning. Thanks to the Port of Corpus Christi for organizing all of us, bringing us together. I'm glad to join my Texas colleagues, both Senator Cornyn and Representative Cloud, and I know some others are joining later this morning. So I am glad to have just a few minutes to talk with you about these matters of great concern in my community and across the country. And I represent the energy capital of the world here in Houston, and I represent the energy corridor. And so the issues that we're talking about today are critical to the future, like I said, not only of my community, but of our entire country. And naturally, we've been watching the impacts of COVID-19 across our country and around the world. And I don't have to tell anyone here that energy producers are facing an unprecedented challenge that will have long-term consequences for our energy independence, our national security, and our energy future. And that's something we've been talking about so much in the period of time leading up to the pandemic. And it's something that Congressman Cloud talked about, all the energy renaissance we've seen here in Texas over the last decade, the great plans for expansion, the work that we've been doing both to authorize the channel improvements, as you mentioned, and although it wasn't in what I wanted to cover this morning, I can say we are actively working on WRDA. I am very optimistic that we will get a WRDA bill done this spring, and there are critical projects there that I fully expect to be authorized. And we are, looking at the present moment, and we're looking ahead. And here in Texas, this is an all of the above energy state. So we care about all forms of energy, and we know that we need to be the leaders around the globe in all forms of energy. And so that's something that we've been very, very focused on here in my district. The view from here right now, as I think you all know, is that we have some tough days ahead. And I don't think I need to tell anybody that's on this call about what we're seeing out in the oil fields, the challenges that we face, the incredible loss of jobs that we've seen throughout the energy sector, and just the challenges that we see when it comes to the impacts, whether it's upstream, midstream, or downstream. We're seeing major cuts in E&P spending. We are seeing operators laying down rigs. We're seeing shut-ins. We're seeing very few options for storage. That's one of the things that I wanted to mention this morning. We've got nowhere for product to go. We've got refineries that are idling, and these are real challenges that have impacts on everybody throughout the industry. So the question that I just want to touch on is, how can Congress help? How are we responding? What can we do? And there are 4 things I want to touch on very briefly this morning. The first is that, what we see is that the market forces that we're driving up the cost of, are still there. We see that the forces that were driving up supply, and Senator Cornyn talked about it a little bit just before the pandemic, and now the forces that are driving down demand because of the pandemic are global. These are global issues. These aren't limited to the United States. And unfortunately, they don't always lend to easy legislative solutions. But there are 4 things that I think we can do, and many more. The first, of course, is the sweeping legislation that Congress has passed, that Congressman Cloud talked a little bit about, to address the many impacts of COVID-19. Those matter in the energy industry. I know I have a lot of oilfield services companies in my district. Many of the smaller suppliers are relying on those SBA loans, the Paycheck Protection Program, the EIDL loans, to stay afloat and to make it through this period of time. Congress obviously has an important role to play in requiring OSHA and the CDC and other relevant agencies to help ensure the safety of our workers and the industries and the communities that they live in. And I think that that's critically important. And then fundamentally having a national coordinated strategy to help us manage the virus and have testing, tracing, and isolation of cases, and work on making our communities safe so that we can reopen our economy. Those are critical parts of the path forward for everyone, including and maybe especially in the energy industry. Second, Congress can help alleviate the need for storage by appropriating funds to purchase crude oil in the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Congressman Cloud also mentioned it. I am the lead sponsor of that bill in the House. Senator Hoeven has sponsored the bill in the Senate. While it didn't make it into the first round, I'm optimistic that that is a smart, strategic approach. We know that it's not going to solve all of the problems and all of the challenges, but it is something that Congress can do that provides an opportunity to help those who are producing our energy right now, and also is a smart long-term strategic purchase for all Americans. So I think that's critically important and something I'm very hopeful we will be able to do. Third, we can invest in infrastructure. I am on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. We've been talking a lot about what the transportation and infrastructure future looks like, and how infrastructure investment can really spur our economy. And we think it's critically important. As I think you all know, Chairman DeFazio has worked tirelessly to make sure that we use the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund to maintain our ports. And that is something that we actually were able to get authorized and made permanent in the CARES Act. And so I think that's critically important. It will have immediate impacts for the Port of Corpus Christi, for the Port of Houston, and for all the ports along the Gulf Coast that are so critical to our energy infrastructure. And on a related note, we all know that so much of the infrastructure investment in our energy sector is actually private investment. And we know that the capital markets in the last few years have been challenging, but we also know that many operators have major capital projects that are planned and that will be needed in the future. And so another thing I think is really important is for Congress to weigh in and make it possible for that work to continue. I serve as the chair of the Energy Subcommittee on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, and we had a roundtable last week or the week before with some experts talking about what we could do, what the impacts of the pandemic would be on energy jobs and on our potential path to accelerate the U.S. energy's economic recovery. And I think, you know, that's very much the topic this morning, and our focus was so much about jobs and construction jobs. Of the more than 5 million jobs that are estimated in the energy industry, more than a third of them are in construction. So keeping these construction projects going is also critically important. And I think one thing we can do is eliminate the barriers for those projects going forward. A week or so ago, I sent a letter to Chairman Chatterjee at the FERC in response to some suggestions that all of those projects have a moratorium during the pandemic. And I don't think that's the right path forward. And I worked with our Natural Gas Caucus. I'm also the co-chair of the Natural Gas Caucus and the Oil and Gas Caucus to put together a letter urging the FERC to continue its important work in permitting and processing these important projects that we know we're going to need. They're critical to our ports, they're critical to our energy infrastructure, and they're going to be critical to our energy future. And so those are some of the things that we are doing right now as a quick synopsis, and some of the things I think we need to continue to do. I share the belief, I think of all Texans and certainly of my colleagues that we've heard from today, that ensuring American energy continues to lead the world is absolutely critical. And we need to do all that we can to make sure that during this pandemic, managing now and after, that we are continuing to put ourselves in a position where we continue to be the global leaders, where we lead with our innovation, with our ideas, with our products. And we know that those are the best, the cleanest in the world. And we want to continue that leadership. So critically important for us to do that. Those are a few of the things that I tried to touch on just in these 5 minutes, but I hope it was a useful perspective. And I thank you so much for inviting me to share my thoughts.
Thank you, Congresswoman Fletcher. We appreciate all that you're doing for Texas, the oil industry, and the Texas ports. Really appreciate your time today. At this time, I would like to bring back Port of Corpus Christi CEO Sean Strawbridge to moderate a panel discussion with our distinguished energy executives. Sean?
Thank you, Omar, and thank you to Congresswoman Fletcher, Congressman Cloud, and certainly Senator Cornyn, again, for your leadership. I now have the distinct honor to moderate a panel of 4 what I would call just real strong leaders in the oil and gas industry. And I'm going to give a brief introduction of each of these 4 gentlemen. And this is based on nothing more than the alphabetized of their last name. I'm going to start with Beau Mccall, CEO of Mota Midstream. Beau has been in the midstream business for over 28 years. He was named CEO of Mota Midstream in 2018. And before founding Mota Midstream, he was Senior Vice President of Commercial and Business Development for oil tanking in North America. Prior to Oil Tanking North America, Beau worked for Conoco's Liquid Pipeline and Transportation Group and Conoco's Natural Gas and Gas Processing Group. Beau is a 1987 graduate of the University of Oklahoma, where he earned a Bachelor of Science degree in Petroleum Engineering. Next is Khalid Muslih. Khalid was named Executive Vice President of Buckeye General Partners and President Global Marine Terminals in January of 2017. Mr. Muslih was Senior Vice President of Buckeye GP and President of Global Marine Terminals prior to this current position. He was also Senior Vice President of Buckeye GP and President International Pipelines and Terminals, and also Senior Vice President of Corporate Development and strategic planning for Buckeye GP. So a wide range of experience there with Khalid. Next is Christopher Smith, Senior Vice President, Policy, Government and Public Affairs for Cheniere. Mr. Smith joined the Cheniere in November of 2017 as Senior Vice President. Prior to joining Cheniere, Mr. Smith was Assistant Secretary of Energy for Fossil Energy at the U.S. Department of Energy, where he led the department's policy, international engagement, and research and development programs for fossil energy. And during that time, he also served as the designated federal official for the National Commission on the BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill and offshore drilling. Prior to his roles in federal government, he was in the private sector in both managerial and analytical positions with Chevron and Texaco. And Chris is also a veteran. He holds a bachelor degree in engineering management from the United States Military Academy at West Point, and also an MBA from Cambridge University. And lastly, Mr. Todd Staples, president of the Texas Oil and Gas Association. He was named to the president of Texoga in November of 2014. As president of the state's oldest and largest trade association representing the industry, Mr. Staples is focused on expanding Texoga's presence as the go-to source for reliable and credible oil and gas information. Prior to Texoga, his appointment at Texoga, Todd served as the Texas Agriculture Commissioner, winning 2 statewide elections. He also served with distinction in the Texas Senate and Texas House of Representatives. And after graduating with honors from Texas A&M University, he began his career on the Palestine City Council, where he was a successful small businessman and a rancher. Gentlemen, good morning and welcome. To start this discussion, I'd like to share an op-ed that was provided by a fellow from SMU, Mr. Bernie. I got his name here somewhere. Anyway, this fine fella, Bernie Weinstein, he wrote last week, five months ago, the oil and gas industry was in robust health. And at 12.5 to 13 million barrels a day, we were the #1 oil producing nation. And the same was certainly true for natural gas, where we led the world for several years. And what's more, we've become an important player in global energy markets. And since the ban on crude exports was lifted in 2015, oil exports had grown exponentially, reaching over 3 million barrels a day by the end of 2019, or about 25% of our domestic production. Shipments of liquefied natural gas were departing from Gulf of Mexico and Chesapeake Bay for Europe, Asia, and South America. And certainly we had created 10 million jobs nationwide, adding workers faster than any other service sector. Then, of course, the coronavirus hit. And in recent weeks, we've seen tens of thousands of layoffs that have been announced by energy companies, large and small. Active rig counts have dropped 50% to their lowest level since the 90s. And a growing number of operators have filed for or pre-filed for bankruptcy, including Chesapeake Energy, which is one of the pioneers of the shale revolution. So my question to all 4 of you gentlemen, does this signal the end of American energy dominance? Will we revert to becoming a net energy exporter again? Should we consider policy interventions to, quote, save the oil and gas industry? I'll ask all 3 of those questions to all 4 of you. Let's start with you, Mr. Mccall. Beau, good morning.
Good morning, Sean. How are you?
I'm well, sir. Thank you. Thank you for attending this morning.
You bet. Well,
have we seen the end of energy dominance?
Well, that's the question of today. I think when you look at the importance of energy in the U.S., I think obviously when you kind of take a look, stepping forward, affordable energy in the U.S. today, I paid $1.19 for my fill in my car, which is kind of sad, but at the same time, it's good on a retail and wholesale basis. Again, as I think everybody's talked about the loss of jobs, a stable energy industry supports hundreds of thousands of jobs and supports the U.S. economy. Since we took over in Ingleside, we continue to add full-time employees And over the past 3 years, we've had as many as 750 contractors on our site. Again, a healthy energy industry in the U.S. supports local, state, and county taxes, royalties, et cetera. And again, when you kind of take a look at the federal trade deficit, American-produced oil is a very reliable source of oil throughout the world, and a sector that can be very unstable. As an example, our facility over the last year and looking forward, depending on the price of oil, can reduce the federal trade deficit up to $15 billion a year. So, I think all these things are hugely important as we move forward. And at the same time, I think things will play out and we'll see how it goes.
Thank you, Beau. Kali, same question for you. Have we seen the end of American energy dominance, or will we emerge, or are we going to revert back to being a net importer of foreign sources of energy? What are your thoughts, sir?
Well, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity. Sean, absolutely not. I don't think we're going to be able to stop the momentum that I think we've all been witnessing over the past decade. Clearly, we are obviously going through some very, very challenging circumstances at the moment. But I think, as we've been able to demonstrate just in prior cycles, the industry has a tremendous degree of resiliency to be able to bounce back. I do think when I look at obviously the amount of infrastructure that has been invested in order to be able to afford the ability to extract these natural resources, and then obviously not only to satisfy whatever our local demand is, but to be able to put that to global markets, I think is exceptional and far-reaching. So clearly we've got some work to do at the moment. I think you're seeing the markets are efficient. You're starting to see price signals that demonstrate, at least to me, that we do have the ability to bounce back from this. And I absolutely believe that the U.S. will remain as an emerging global player in the energy space. And I absolutely believe that the U.S. will continue to grab market share as a function of just, again, the advances in technology, the infrastructure investments that have already been made, the continuous improvements, across the entire sector. I do believe that it's not the end.
Well, that's, I think you're right. I mean, resiliency is I don't want that to be a worn out word or a fad. I think you're absolutely right that this industry has shown tremendous resiliency, and I'm hopeful that it will again. Moving on to Chris Smith with Cheniere. Cheniere's a little different animal, certainly a leader in LNG exports from the United States, and has really been a bright spot. But Chris, I'm certainly interested in your perspective on the impact of COVID-19 on LNG globally, and specifically here in Texas. We've seen a lot of LNG projects be deferred or even canceled as a result of the demand destruction. What are your thoughts about our energy independence and our ability to continue the momentum, considering we've been knocked off our stride significantly with the demand destruction that we've seen globally?
Well, thanks, Sean, for that question, and thanks also for the Port of Corpus Christi holding this event. We think it's terrifically important. It was great to hear from our members of Congress. So yeah, we're seeing some challenges in the global market, certainly through COVID, and I won't reiterate everything that my fellow panelists have said here, but we're also very bullish on U.S. LNG, and we're bullish on our ability, our potential to compete. We see the market fundamentals as being still very, very strong for U.S. LNG and for U.S. producers. We're seeing some headwinds. I mean, globally, we're seeing projects that are starting to get delayed in terms of getting the final investment decision into 2021 and beyond. But overall, we think we've got a terrific platform for growth right here in the state of Texas, based right here in Corpus Christi and in San Patricio County. We think that's an incredibly important and valuable platform. we've got a strong and powerful symbiotic relationship with the port that is helping us build this great infrastructure platform. We're really looking forward to continuing to work together in that way. Also have a very strong symbiotic relationship with our producers. We've gone from spending about $30 billion building 2 terminals in the Gulf of Mexico to now, over the last 3 years, being currently the largest purchaser of natural gas in the United States. So, you know, we've got a very, very strong relationship with the producers, with all Todd Staples members. And we think that having that infrastructure platform, you know, based right there in Corpus, our CEO in our recent earnings call, he referred to our maniacal kind of obsession about operational excellence. And that's ensured that we continue to operate. We're able to buy all the gas we need. We're able to move it to our platform. And we're ensuring that in this COVID environment, we're able to produce, load ships, and supply the market in a way that ensures no interruptions. Because you can imagine the impact that that would have on the entire supply chain if Cheniere was not able to execute. So we've got a singular focus on operational excellence in this period. And over the medium and long term, we think that the fundamentals are going to remain strong. There's going to be a strong demand for natural gas and LNG from the United States. We see Chinese demand already kind of coming back. Early days for Europe, but we know that over the next decades, we're expecting over 100 gigawatts of coal and nuclear power to be decommissioned. And that's going to be an opportunity that we feel very strongly for natural gas and liquefied natural gas coming from the United States. So again, we think we've got a terrific platform, you know, based right here in the state of Texas, based right here in Corpus Christi, relying on strong sources of supply from our partners in the upstream.
Well, that's certainly encouraging, particularly as you see more conversions as the United States has undertaken from coal-fired power plants to natural gas on a global basis. You know, interestingly, I've seen some statistics where global air quality has improved over these COVID protocols that sovereignties have instituted. The ozone hole has closed, and we're seeing now polar vortexes in May. So that sounds like it's encouraging for more demand for American natural gas. Moving on to Mr. Staples, who, full disclosure, I'm a big fan of Todd. He's a dear friend. And Todd, you were very vocal when it came to policy intervention by the Railroad Commission in opposition of proration. But Todd, do you think that there are other policy interventions that could help, save is probably a drastic word, but help the oil and gas industry get back on its feet here in Texas, including perhaps foreign policy changes?
Sean, it's good to be with you. Thank you all for your leadership and bringing us together today. Absolutely. I think the main thing we need to focus on and remember is that what made Texas the energy capital of the world, and what made us this strong, and what attracted this level of investment, and what has grown the jobs in our state has been, we've been focused on science-based regulations, fair and predictable and stable policies. And so as we look beyond this and look to what environment we need to continue to attract those jobs and continue to attract that capital, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. Obviously, one of those are policies. Railroad Commission Chairman Wayne Christian assembled the Blue Ribbon Task Force on Oil Economic Recovery, and we provided over 4 dozen recommendations that the Railroad Commission is going to be looking at, that other state agencies are going to be looking at, and that other entities that govern Texas will be looking at. So that's very important. But I think it's also important to remember the reason that Texas is positioned to lead this recovery is because of the infrastructure that we have. Sean, it's what I refer to as the 4 Ps. Ports, pipelines, our processing, meaning our refining and downstream, and then our production. We have the assets here because of a fair and predictable policy that has attracted this growth, that has made us the energy capital of the world. And we don't need to lose sight of that when it comes to policies and it comes to positioning us for the future. You know, we certainly are the best of times pre-COVID. It's the worst of times post-COVID, and we are positioned to recover. And I think the last downturn really is a good indicator of where we need to be. If we think about 2014 and the banner year that it was, and then revenues to state and local governments dropped about 40% with a contraction that we saw. We had employment levels that, you know, dropped over 100,000 positions. That ramped back up by 2018 and 2019 to be the strong years. And so we're going to have contractions, but if we maintain good policies, we'll be able to recover nicely, I believe.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there, and you know, there's a wide gamut of arguments from, you know, the shale renaissance is over and it will never come back to, you know, this is a blip, albeit a big bump in the road, but the resiliency of American energy producers and all the service companies and the midstream companies and the downstream companies, that we will see a recovery. The question is, of course, when. And so with that in mind, Beau, what are some of the infrastructure challenges that you see? I know Mota operates both in the Houston ship channel and certainly down here in Corpus Christi. Where do you see potential infrastructure challenges as we try and come out of the recovery? And where is Mota really focusing its attention to ensure that those infrastructure gaps are closed to the best of the industry's ability and certainly Mota's ability?
Well, I think a lot of the infrastructure is there. You know, as Todd mentioned, the pipelines, processing, terminals, and ports. The infrastructure is there as we've invested a lot of money in Ingleside and continue to invest money. You know, for all intent and purpose, I think, you know, as long as the oil continues to flow, the infrastructure is there, and we'll be able to continue to supply the critical supply link to the overall supply chain of getting energy out of the U.S.
Yeah, you know, like anything, midstream, the midstream space tends to overbuild. You know, there's not this nice, easy correlation or curve between production and infrastructure. You know, infrastructure takes a long time to build, so you sometimes have either an overcapacity or an undercapacity. We never quite reach that equilibrium because of how long and how capital intensive infrastructure is. But colleague, given that oil storage continues to fill up in this country, I think we've got, you know, we're talking about tank tops, you know, all storage being at capacity, tank tops not being what I'm wearing under my suit, but a reference to storage capacity here. And at the same time, we've seen this acute demand destruction. You know, what should your industry leaders do to assist in absorbing some of that that additional production with additional infrastructure, perhaps, knowing that demand will come back? The question is, of course, when. But how do we navigate today's environment where we've got an acute oversupply and yet the demand destruction is still extreme relative to where it was just a couple short months ago?
I think, Sean, the short answer to your question is that we should just keep doing what we're doing. I think as I just look back, the industry has demonstrated a significant ability to respond to the rapid decline in demand. On the one hand, you have the producers who moved very, very aggressively to cut production and capital spending levels. I think globally, I think I read something on the order of over $100 billion, you know, in capital spending is reduced, of which I think 40% of that is in the U.S. alone. On the other side, from the refining standpoint, the refiners also significantly cut their processing rates so that they would be at very, very low levels to mitigate the rapid buildup in refined products. And then, of course, you know, for us in the midstream sector, which is really the critical link between supply and demand, that sector has also played a very, very critical role to stabilize the market during this event. Of course, we'd all like to obviously sprint to the finish line, but we recognize that this is going to be a bit of a marathon, but I do believe that we're very well situated to handle this. As one of the leading independent midstream energy companies, we at Buckeye were able to provide over 100 million barrels of storage capacity as a key outlet for refiners to manage the rapid decrease in refined products demand, and in turn, we were also able to provide our producers and marketers the ability to store their oil to preserve its value. Locally, I think, as you're aware, we've obviously invested quite heavily in South Texas, particularly in the Corpus region. Our soon-to-be open South Texas Gateway Terminal, which was originally developed to export large throughput volumes of U.S. crude oil on very large ships. Of course, that indeed will be the expectation as we continue to move forward. But in the near term, we'll provide up to 10 million barrels of storage capacity to, again, help preserve the value of U.S. production here in the near term. Things will cycle back. And as we cycle back to a tighter supply and demand balance, this particular asset and other export-related infrastructure in the area will continue to play a critical role in growing the USA's market share for global oil demand. And I think that's a very important point, because the investments that have made in infrastructure within the region are scalable. They're able to obviously provide that ability to absorb, the shock waves. Yes, we've been tested from the standpoint of obviously, this black swan event. But I think, you're already seeing obviously some price signals that would indicate that things are starting to move in the other direction, and I think that's an important point with regards to the rapid response by the industry to this event. So again, I do believe that eventually we'll cycle back. We've got a concerted industry effort here that's ongoing, and eventually you'll see a tightness in the supply-demand balance as demand continues to recover.
Yeah, I think that's what we all certainly hope for. I guess the big question is, of course, how long will it take for this supply-demand imbalance to work itself out globally, given that we saw upwards of nearly 30 million barrels a day of demand destruction on a global scale. And certainly the APAC region, the Asia-Pacific region, was early hit in the coronavirus pandemic, and China obviously being front and center with that. And we've seen this administration at odds with China, moving to Chris, and not to put you on the spot, but knowing that Chris, China is probably the largest and growing demand center for liquefied natural gas. From Cheniere's perspective, as those tensions with China continue to bubble to the top of the political agenda with this administration, how is the LNG industry positioning itself to continue to meet that growing demand at a time when we have this chasm with the two governments from a policy standpoint?
Yeah, well, thanks, Sean. And I always love a question that starts with not to put you on the spot, right? So I guess I intended right up. But listen, candidly, and I'm going to tell you something you already know. Trade tensions with China, present us with some challenges. When you look at the global LNG market, China is an important market. But one of the things that I'll emphasize, and this is the way that we think about all of our business. Our business is a decadal business. Our investments are decadal investments. These are multi-billion-dollar investments for each FID, for each train. And so the thing that we emphasize is that, our business cycle extends beyond the political cycle. Like, even in the most difficult moments, we continue to talk to suppliers, and we continue to talk to buyers in China. And, we are the connective tissue that connects drillers in West Texas with buyers in Beijing. So we think the business fundamentals of that connection continue to be good. We continue to be kind of bullish on our long-term prospects. I'm I'm not a fan of tariffs. You know, the company's not a fan of tariffs. We believe that without tariffs, we're able to make more efficient investment decisions. But you know, one thing that I'll emphasize is that the current tensions, while they create some challenges, and my job here in DC is to kind of watch some of that. But over the medium to long term, we think that the prospect for continuing to find opportunities in China and in other markets remains very, very strong, because the product that we're offering here, natural gas from the United States, in which you're buying not only the reliability of our suppliers, you're buying the reliability of the Cheniere infrastructure in Corpus Christi and in Sabine Pass, but you're also buying the overall regulatory environment in the United States, which I think ensures that the product that you're receiving is going to be managed in such a way that we're taking all the steps to manage, upstream fugitive methane emissions, all the other things that determine that the product overall is going to be attractive. So, we continue to work in China and elsewhere. We're a long-term player, and we're going to continue to move forward with the right type of business and commercial and investment discipline that will help the region in Corpus Christi remain successful.
If I was to summarize that, you guys are playing long ball, and certainly our relationship with China goes back decades and will endure, I think, for decades to come. And I wouldn't quite, if I was to characterize it as a marriage, as we know, marriages sometimes are good, sometimes not so good, and sometimes you're in counseling. Perhaps we're in counseling right now with China, but certainly I think energy plays a pivotal role in our trade discussions with China, both oil and gas, and Cheniere is certainly at the forefront of that. Moving on to Todd, let's talk a little bit about just the biggest threats that are facing the oil and gas industry. We see a lot of criticism, a lot of pushback about the impact on climate change from the oil and gas industry. We're seeing a lot more opposition from the environmental justice constituency. I mean, what is Texoga's position? What does your industry members say about these criticisms, and how can the industry better inform the general public as to the value of the oil and gas industry?
Well, I think oil and gas is the real leader in environmental progress. And it's clear that all of us, there's a global responsibility to care for our planet. And that's why the oil and gas community is doing so much when you look at using technology and using innovation. While production has skyrocketed over the last decade, carbon dioxide emissions have declined by double digits, methane emissions have declined by double digits. So climate concerns are one thing, but climate hysteria is another. We need to be smart in the way that we meet our energy needs. And that's why in Texas, we have created the Texas Methane and Flaring Coalition to come together to talk about ways to mitigate flaring, to mitigate methane emissions, all while continuing to meet the energy needs that our world depends upon, and that 96% of the products that we use each and every day comes from a component of oil or natural gas. The Environmental Partnership is another example of coming together to define best practices, to make certain that those practices are available to producers, not only here in Texas and in the United States, but all over the world. And so we're making good progress, and we need to realize that the quality of life that we enjoy today is because of the commitment to innovation and technology, using artificial intelligence, carbon capture, utilization and sequestration, using drone technology, leak detection and repair equipment, cleaner burning fuels. If you look at every sector of oil and natural gas, there's a strong commitment to be smarter, to be cleaner, and to be the kind of partner we think that the world expects and that we know the world depends upon. And so I think there's a bright energy future. I think we will continue to see breakthroughs on environmental progress that will enable this industry to continue to be the strong partner to have the energy security that is essential for national security. And we proudly and boldly embrace these steps that we're making. This industry is committed literally billions and hundreds of billions of dollars toward environmental progress. And it's a message that we hope that everyone will share and that will be willing to have a communication about. But misinformation is certainly not the way to do that. Good, clean, strong information is what we want to continue to provide.
Thank you, Todd. Gentlemen, we've got about 2 minutes left. I'm going to give each of you 30 seconds. As you heard from my previous opening remarks when I quoted Sun Tzu from his book, The Art of War, out of chaos comes opportunity. 30 seconds, please, each one of you. Where do you see opportunities for our energy sector at large and specifically for Texas in the wake of COVID-19? Start with you, Mr. Mccall.
Yeah, I think as has been stated on the call today, you know, the Texas leads the way in the energy space in the United States. The amount of investment, technology that's gone in over the last 5 years, it has been remarkable, the growth, and as you see in the Port of Corpus Christi and the Coastal Bend, billions of dollars have continued to be invested. This is an unprecedented blip in the energy industry. Obviously, we'll see how we kind of come out on the backside of that. But at Mota, we are very excited about the long-term position where we are positioned down in Corpus. All the benefits that you have in terms of geopolitical influence, economic drivers, and energy independence are key things that will continue to lead the U.S. out of this and the energy industry in specific.
Thank you, Beau. Mr. Muesli.
Yeah, I mean, again, just to reiterate what's been said, obviously we're also very bullish on U.S. energy and more relevantly with respect to the critical investments that we've made, in Texas to facilitate the export of that energy globally. Look, I mean, I know just looking here backwards, we've gone through some incredibly challenging events, but I think we're starting to see some green shoots. The markets are efficient. We're starting to see price signals, obviously, enabling what I believe will foster that eventual cycling of tightness in supply and demand. And when that takes shape, we obviously as industry players will be able to again, facilitate providing the market with whatever the market needs. We've been operating within a period of what's called contango, which obviously provides an incentive for storage. But as as a result of all the various actions that we've just discussed, you'll start seeing obviously a curtailment in the buildup of these inventories, and we'll naturally start to work our way towards inventory draws as demand continues to recover. And when that takes shape, we'll obviously then go back into a period of backwardation, which in essence is one where obviously you'll see the benefits of our ability to be able to go out and export both oil and gas from this country. So again, we're in for a little bit of a tough road here in the near term, but I don't for a second believe that we'll be able to overcome this challenge. We've done it before, and we're going to do it again.
Thank you, Khalid. Mr. Smith.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Well, I mean, clearly our story, our collective story is the story of partnerships. And so from the point of view of Cheniere as the infrastructure player in the middle, we've got to be able to purchase the gas. We've got to be able to move it on pipelines to our facility. We have to make sure that we are operating efficiently. We're getting it to the end user, and that we're cooperating, with our partners in the port of Corpus Christi and elsewhere to ensure that we're continuing to build when it's time to build. So we have to do all this together. We have got a common goal. We've got a common mission. But when you look at the attractiveness of U.S. LNG on the global market, again, what we're offering is that collective set of partnerships. And that's not something that we're building overnight. It's not something we're building right now in the COVID era. It's something that we're capitalizing on all the work that we've done over the years. So again, I remain very confident in the prospects for the energy markets in Texas, for U.S. LNG, and for our future ability to continue to compete on the global market.
Thank you, Chris. I too am I'm bullish long term, particularly on LNG as we move to it. It's been talked about as a bridge fuel. I think it's not a bridge fuel. I think it's a destination fuel given the abundance of it. Moving on to lastly, Mr. Staples, opportunities that you see out of the chaos that we've seen over the last 2 months.
Well, it's certainly been painful, and we know we're not through the choppy waters yet, Sean. But here's the thing that I think we can all look at. If you look at the demand destruction and how rapidly this industry has responded to try to bring into stabilization the demand and supply elements, I think it's a real signal of the potential in moving forward. The panelists on this call all talked about how industry developed expanded storage capacities to deal with the excess supply. Technology and innovation is the heart and soul of oil and natural gas, using the best and brightest minds. And so we are very well positioned to continue to be the energy leader of the world if we do not give up on the free market principles that has been the catalyst to bring the jobs and to bring the investment to Texas. So as we move beyond the demand destruction and return to more stabilized circumstances, as we work through the excess supply that is built up, let's adhere to science-based policies. Let's make certain we have fair tax policies that encourage just jobs and investment in this state so that we can compete not only nationally, but globally. And I think we're very well positioned to do that if we don't forget the things that made us successful in the first place. And this is a great venue today to have us all on to have this conversation. Thank you and your team.
Thank you, Todd. And thank you all, gentlemen, Beau, Khalid, Chris. We really appreciate your time and your insight today. Certainly, it's a sector that is near and dear to us here in Texas and at the Port of Corpus Christi as we continue to follow your lead in both informing the state and the nation as to its importance, not only economic importance, but certainly the national security and foreign policy importance as well. But most importantly, the job creation that this industry has been able to demonstrate and hopefully demonstrate again. You know, we've not seen, there is no bigger impact, negative impact on public health than poverty. And we've got to get these fine women and men back to work. And I just want to thank you, your members, your organizations for doing your part in just that. I also want to just a little housekeeping note. We got a lot of questions online. I apologize that we weren't able to get to those questions online, but I submit to you that we will get those questions answered to you and back to you. And if there are questions that are specifically directed at one of our panelists, we'll ensure we get the question to them and make sure that we get that back to you. I want to thank you all again. And Omar, I'm going to turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sean.
Thank you, gentlemen, for a very insightful panel, very informative. We appreciate everybody's time today. At this time, I would like to turn it over to Anthony Dragna with Politico. Anthony, welcome to Texas Energy Day.
Morning, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with everybody and to participate in what's been a really timely and interesting discussion. We're going to be looking, I'm a congressional energy and climate reporter for Politico. I've been covering this space for the better part of a decade, and certainly there's been no time quite like this. So we're going to, with this panel, hopefully take a look at the federal response and what may be coming next in that space. We're going to try to have time for some audience questions at the end, so feel free to get those questions in. And with that, let me introduce our panelists. First, we have Chet Thompson, who's the president and CEO of the American Fuel and Petrochemical Manufacturers. We also have Jeff Morehouse, Senior Director of Government Affairs at ClearPath. And finally, we have Charlie Riedel, Vice President of the Natural Gas Supply Association and Executive Director of the Center for LNG. And so I thought what I'd start with for the three of you, and perhaps each of you can go through and offer some introductory comments, but then take a crack at this higher level question. Congress has obviously, the Senate has, as Senator Cornyn said, tapped the brakes on an additional relief package at this point. But I think all indications are we're going to see another package at some point. From each of your perspectives, what are the policies that would be beneficial for your sectors for Congress to consider including? And then as well, what would be helpful from an administrative perspective in terms of getting us out of this pandemic? So I guess we'll start with Chet. I think you may still be muted.
Okay, hopefully, there we go. Thank you for the question, Anthony, and thank you to the Port of Corpus Christi for including me. This is my first time participating in Texas Energy Day, and it's a real honor to be here and an honor for me to represent the U.S. refining and petrochemical industry. So let me say where AFPM has been on the, the COVID packages. And frankly, it seems odd for me, for a Washingtonian, to say this, but our position has been for there to be no federal policies specific to the refining and petrochemical industry. The message that we have been relaying is, let's not make a bad situation worse by pursuing, policies that we may regret down the road. We think the focus needs to be on getting the country through the COVID crisis. By and large, from a refining perspective, this is a demand crisis. And we need to get, for demand to come back, we need to get our economies open, our cities open. And that's just going to take some time. But that's what we need. We don't need to make things, again, worse by having policies that I know we're going to get into later this morning, but policies that might, in the long term, impede the free market. Because if the free market has worked on the way up, we think the free market needs to work during difficult times as well. So again, and by the way, we're seeing some of that starting to work now. If you look at data over the last few weeks, we're seeing upticks in demand. We're seeing upticks in gasoline demand. So we think we are starting to be on the road to recovery. And so again, what we would ask is, and what we're worried about is not having the next stimulus become a Christmas tree of a whole lot of public policies that are unrelated to getting us through COVID. And then with any luck, we'll keep Congress focused on what really needs to happen. Again, as it relates to our industry, we need to get demand back, and that's going to come through getting our cities reopened.
Great, Jeff.
Thanks, Anthony. Thanks, Port of Corpus Christi, for hosting this Texas Energy Day. So I work for ClearPath, which we are a conservative organization supporting clean energy development and projects. We focus mainly on carbon capture for coal and gas, nuclear power, geothermal energy storage, all in the clean sector. So my background, I worked for Congressman Bill Flores. I was his chief of staff for 6 years, and before that, worked for Mr. John Culberson down in Houston. And so kind of to Chet's point, as we look forward, the House came out with a new package yesterday, very little by way of energy in the package. There's some for utility to prevent utility shutoffs. There's some additional dollars for LIHEAP, but not like a larger infrastructure energy package that has been kind of discussed. There is a potential for that in the future if there is an infrastructure bill. However, right now, I think what the members and the senator said, there's a little bit of spending fatigue and want to focus on the here and now and what we actually need to do to get through this crisis. So in terms of moving forward, I think we're looking at a lot of different things, but the Senate already had an energy bill on the floor that unfortunately failed. However, there may be in the future an opportunity to get something like that done. The House has done a lot of work as well, whether it be with Congresswoman Lizzie Fletcher and Congressman Randy Weber, their committee, the Energy, Science and Tech Energy Subcommittee. A lot of great R&D bills have gone through there, but they haven't come to the floor yet. So I think we're focused in watching those, but in terms of, attaching something to one of these larger spending bills seems unlikely right now.
Great. And Charlie?
Oh, good morning. Thanks, Anthony. Thanks for the question, and thanks for to the Port of Corpus Christi for the invitation to participate here today. I'd echo a lot of what Chet said as far as what the Center for LNG and the Natural Gas Supply Association are after right now, and really that is we have not been seeking any kind of specific legislative activity that would artificially stimulate the market in any kind of way. Center for LNG and Natural Gas Supply Association have had longstanding positions for free market. I don't see that changing. Acknowledging obviously what everyone has said ahead of me this morning, we hold a similar viewpoint from where we're pushing and what we're after. And if you sort of listen to what Chris Smith was talking about from Cheniere earlier, from an LNG perspective in particular. As we look at the impacts from COVID right now, obviously there have been impacts that have negatively impacted the industry. But what we look at is the long-term and the intermediate future for those facilities and those operations. And we obviously feel encouraged and positive about all of that. So from a congressional standpoint right now, I don't see our ask changing significantly from what we were doing pre-COVID related to any kind of funding or stimulus for the industry.
Got it. All right, Chet, I wanted to ask you, Texas Governor Greg Abbott and 4 other governors has petitioned EPA to exercise its waiver authority to waive RFS compliance burdens for U.S. refiners based on the hardships they're facing economically during the pandemic. Were this relief granted, how would it help your members weather the current challenges and then get back to strength when the worst of this is over?
Can you hear me? You froze up a little bit on me. I apologize, but I think I got the gist of the question, which was the RFS and the fact of the governor's request for RFS relief. And let me just say, I think you mentioned 4 other governors, but as of yesterday, it's 5 other governors, as Pennsylvania has also, Governor Wolf is also now seeking relief as well. And let me just say about the RFS is a bad policy in the best of times, right? And we have been advocating for years that the time for there to be federal mandates pushing biofuels, particularly ethanol, it's over. If there ever was a precedent initially for why we needed that program, again, that time has come and gone. Ethanol, by the way, we're not anti-ethanol. My members produce about 20% of the ethanol in this country. So, we're big ethanol fans. We're just anti-ethanol and biofuel mandates. But again, this program has been a real, burden on refiners, particularly smaller refineries, for years. And now in the midst of this COVID crisis and this demand crisis, we think it's imperative that EPA, at the very least, suspend the program for the foreseeable future. We recognize, frankly, that the ethanol guys are feeling pain as well, but we shouldn't compound it, make it worse by having this program go on as if we have the same level of gasoline demand that was the basis of this year's, RVO. And so, we believe that the governors, it's bipartisan. Republicans and Democrat governors are seeking this relief. We support it, and we would certainly encourage EPA to, suspend the program for the balance of this year and then revisit where this should go in future years when they go through the broader RFS reset process.
Great. Jeff, obviously the conversation in Washington, I think, is going to shift over to recovery next. Are there clean energy incentives or initiatives that you think need to be a part of recovery discussions, and what might those look like?
Sure. Thanks, Anthony. So in terms of moving forward in a recovery, obviously all energy jobs always important in helping through recovery, especially as we lost jobs in the oil patch in Texas right now. So looking forward, there are certain pieces of legislation. Again, I mentioned the Senate had the Murkowski Manchin energy package that unfortunately did not pass. However, could potentially be brought up in the future. On the House side, the House has a lot of different proposals. Some of them match up very nicely with that bill, but there is Chairman Pallone introduced the Clean Act. There's the Green Act, which is a tax bill at Ways and Means, which includes tax incentives. Again, Science and Tech has introduced a handful of bills, one of them being Senator Cornyn and Dan Crenshaw's leading, which is the Natural Gas Carbon Capture Research and Development Act. So those things have mainly passed committee, with the exception of E&C and Ways and Means. But in terms of moving forward, Congress has been working on a lot of these bills, so they just need to get to the floor, whether it be this year or potentially next year. So within T&I, they're also looking at, potentially doing some pipeline or carbon pipeline legislation as well, some permitting reforms. Some of the things the administration could be doing right now, which would benefit jobs, is the getting out the regs for the 45Q tax incentive. So just, we don't have to reinvent the wheel here. A lot of this legislation has been proposed, has been voted on, had conversations in committee. It's really just a timing issue right now.
Gotcha. And Charlie, LNG exports have obviously grown steadily and reshaped the Gulf Coast with new export terminals. Do you see this trend continuing? And are we going to see kind of a second wave of projects manifest?
Great question. And if you would have asked me this 6 months ago, I would have given you a very different answer. I don't think the answer actually is going to change in the long term from what I was saying prior to COVID. I do think that to your point around the second wave of projects, I do think we'll see the second wave of projects, right? And we think about Texas in particular. There are 3 that are already permitted, new projects that are already permitted that are waiting to turn dirt. So as we see the market fundamentals begin to rebound a bit for LNG demand, I would expect that those projects that are in South Texas will likely move forward, or we'll see at least a couple of those projects move forward as part of that second wave that we're talking about. Cheniere, who is on the line represented today, talking about expansion projects that they're working on, the Freeport project in Texas also working on an expansion as well. So I would expect that will happen. The interesting challenge, right, that we're all sort of looking at right now is what's the timing of that look like? And it depends, right? We're starting to see in Asia, as they emerge a bit ahead of us, demand start to creep back up for natural gas again. And so it just sort of depends upon how quickly we recover globally, right? And as we think about that, it's tied to how quickly customers start buying gas, right? We saw China buy U.S. cargoes last month for the first time in 13 months. So we're starting to see some of that demand emerge again. I think it's going to be a bit of a prolonged process, but it's important to continue to stress as we think about the long-term viability of these facilities, right? They're not thinking about it in 6 months increments. They're not thinking about it in 18 months increments. They're thinking about it in 30-year increments, 25-year increments of operation. So when we think about that, somebody made the comment about it being a blip on the radar. It's a rather large blip right now, especially if you're a project trying to get to final investment decision and begin construction. It's a rather large blip, right? And so the landscape might look a little bit different. I do still think, though, that second wave of projects will come to fruition. It just might be a little bit further out than we had originally forecast as a result of COVID.
Gotcha. And Chet, I've in conversations with Republicans on the Hill in recent weeks, I've heard everything floated from potential tariffs on imported crude, low interest loans for drillers to support the industry, a whole host of proposals. What do you make of this idea of tariffs on imported crude? And what do you make of that idea? And if that's not the proper response, what do you think should be?
Well, thank you, Anthony, for that question. We have been very vocal over the last, 2, 3, 4 weeks on this issue, and we have certainly been opposing, the notion of tariffs or restrictions on foreign crude. This falls into that category I talked about of let's not make a bad situation worse. Let's not pursue public policies we'll regret later. And from a U.S. refining perspective, I mean, that's again a really bad idea. So let's take this issue, which was at the heart of this, was the inbound, Saudi crude. And, for one, these Saudi crude purchases were done months and months ago, as you know, the lead time that's needed. But, there are a number of the refining kit out there today that's configured to run on medium and heavy sour crudes. And, where we can get those crudes, this is a global commodity. Some of the places we can get these crudes comes from Saudi. And these are the crudes that our facilities need to compete in the global, landscape right now. So there's also this, this notion that, these Saudi crudes or foreign crudes are displacing U.S. light sweet, and that's just simply not true. These crudes are more likely displacing Canadian crude, Mayan, Russian resid. So, they aren't, this is not negatively impacting, the domestic production. So the only thing by putting tariffs on, this would make it harder for U.S. refiners to compete. And it was also going to make it harder for U.S. refiners to follow the price signal, which is, we don't refine crude just for the sake of refining crude. We refine crude to make products that are in demand. And, up until the last couple of weeks, the products that were in demand were distillates and not gasoline. And the heavier crudes, as you know, have a higher distillate yield. So that was the crude that was in demand for our refineries. We can't just flip a switch and start going from running medium to heavy sours to lighting light sweet. So again, and the other issue is, we lead the world in refined product exports. So if we're going to start imposing tariffs on imports, of course, we would expect other countries to consider starting to put restrictions on our refined products going abroad. And again, in the long term, those are just not in the best interest of anyone in the energy sector.
Yeah, that's something I heard from Senator Murkowski, who's the chairman of the Energy Committee last week, just sort of worried about unintended consequences with any of these potential policy solutions. Jeff, I wanted to ask if there are technologies that you think are being lost in the discussion here, whether that's CCS or other technologies that should be a greater part of the discussion on Capitol Hill as we discuss moving forward with the energy sector's recovery and what's next technologically?
So obviously CCS, very important for Texas. I mean, the administration is working on the 45Q regulations now. There's been some discussion of if there is some sort of clean energy tax package moving forward, having a 45Q extension or a fix to the BEAT issue include or direct pay included in that. So those conversations have been happening. I think there's also, in terms of like building large projects in the future, we need to be looking at some NEPA reforms as well. So CEQ has been moving forward with some reforms. Maybe codifying something like that would be really helpful in getting these projects developed and built in the future. Congress has also looked at power purchase agreements, so longer term agreements within the utility sector. Instead of 10 years, maybe lengthening those, like what's been proposed in both the House and the Senate. And then also, I think longer term, we need to be looking at, what does our supply chain look like in terms of clean energy technologies? There have been a lot of conversations about how do we bring things back from China. I mean, we have certain issues with, getting nuclear fuel, right? How are we going to get that fuel here to develop advanced reactors? But also in terms of like building large technologies, we're dependent a lot on China. So I think there are going to be conversations over the next few years, really, on what that supply chain looks like and how we can be developing those technologies here.
Gotcha. So we're going to have an opportunity for audience Q&A. So if people want to get in those questions, be happy to put your questions to these guys, these experts. Charlie, I wanted to also get your take on just how the pandemic has affected the regulatory side of LNG projects. and whether or not you think there's an opportunity and a need to develop additional natural gas infrastructure kind of amid the economic hardship that this pandemic has created.
So two sort of separate questions there, and I think that from a regulatory standpoint, we have not really seen a negative impact, right? In fact, we've seen FERC continuing to work in a what I understand it as a pretty effective manner as far as looking at LNG projects. One of the things that we've been paying close attention to, and I think is a positive development today, I just saw announced that Andrew Kohut was named for the FERC's division of LNG. So the establishment of that and moving a group to Houston is obviously something that's a positive development there. Department of Energy actually just issued a notice of proposed rulemaking last week regarding NEPA review and how they look at LNG facilities. So we're seeing the main regulatory agencies that do engage the LNG industry continuing to function, continuing to work, which is obviously encouraging and a positive aspect of what's been happening for our industry. As far as additional LNG infrastructure and natural gas infrastructure on the whole, it's an interesting concern, and I think that as we look at this, and again, it's the life cycle of that infrastructure that's an important aspect to look at. As we think about the continued development, I think it is important, and because we will ultimately emerge from this, whether it's 6 months from now, 6 weeks from now, we're going to need to continue to rely on, especially from a natural gas perspective, that infrastructure and getting it from areas like the Permian, areas like the Marcellus, down to the Gulf Coast, where we are building LNG facilities and those expansions are happening. And we're going to continue to see demand increase as the rest of the world emerges from this pandemic as well. So as we think about that planning and that perspective, while we've seen demand reduced as a result of the pandemic, I have nothing but confidence to assume that once we start to emerge from this, we'll see that demand bounce back, and ultimately we will need more infrastructure because we needed it before the pandemic, and I don't see any reason why that's going to change post-pandemic. In fact, as we have been having conversations, especially on an international level, a lot of these countries are using this pandemic as a bit of a springboard to think about the transition in their countries from an energy perspective. And so switching towards more natural gas to help enable the adoption of renewables as well. So that partnership that natural gas plays with renewables, I think on a global level, will require more infrastructure in the US as we think about it from an LNG perspective.
Got it. Then let me ask you, all of you, this question. And that's what steps do you think our leaders in Congress and in the administration need to take to ensure that our domestic energy industry is both secure and less reliant on foreign energy sources? And what do you see as the main challenges for them in enacting those sorts of policies? And we can start with Chet.
Okay, look, let me just start off with something about the premise of the question. And there's a lot of talk about, U.S. energy independence and are we there? And, I think it's more important to talk about United States energy security. And I think, by the way, we have a great story to tell in that regard. We're much, much more secure today than we have been in a very long time. And we're not as reliant on foreign crude as it may seem. And I was looking over some of our numbers recently, and what we saw was last year, 90% of all the crude inputs to our refineries, so it's about 16.7 million barrels a day last year, 90% of that was North American crude that went into our refining kit. That's pretty doggone energy secure. So 90% and 60% of that was domestic production. That's why AFPM was such a supporter of USMCA and getting that across the finish line, because we should be looking at energy security, not only in the United States, but what our friends Canada and Mexico bring to the table. And again, we are very energy secure. Before pre-COVID, we led the world in oil and gas production, and I have every confidence and optimism that we're going to return to that place in the world once we put this in a rearview mirror. But I do want to echo longer term something that Jeff alluded to, and that is the need for infrastructure reform in this country. I'm hoping once we get COVID beyond us, we can get Congress focused on an infrastructure package, and included in that would be permitting reform. It is very, very difficult to get any energy project permitted today, as most folks probably watching know. Just last week, there was another setback. There was a district court case that has frozen nationwide permit 12 for all oil and gas infrastructure projects. These are the kind of things that makes for a lot of uncertainty, and also then creates difficulties for our energy, our industry going forward. We need to get Congress involved. That should be bipartisan. We also support a strong energy sector, and hopefully we'll get Congress focused on that once we get COVID behind us.
Jeff?
Yeah, I agree with Chet again on the need for permitting reform, and that's something longer term that we need to be looking at to be developing projects here. But again, just going back to what I mentioned before in terms of supply chain and making sure that we have the products here and we're developing technologies here, so we're not reliant on, say, testing our nuclear material in Russia or in China. So again, just looking at the supply chain issues.
And Charlie?
I think that there are a couple of unique opportunities, and I would echo what Chet and Jeff sort of have touched on from permitting reform. But I also think that there are some other sort of challenges that exist specific to the natural gas world. We do have obviously pipeline challenges that exist, and the Northeast is a good place to take a look for an example, right? And one of the challenges, we have a LNG facility, Cove Point, the facility in Maryland. That Dominion owns and operates, and we have an LNG import terminal in just outside of Boston. We can't bring LNG from Cove Point to the Northeast because we've got Jones Act laws that prevent us from moving that LNG on a foreign flag vessel from one location in the U.S. to another. So things like that, where we could issue permits or make small changes legislatively. We don't have LNG flag vessels, carriers in the U.S. We're not building any in the U.S. Except for LNG bunkering for vessels, for powering vessels. So those kinds of small changes, while we work through larger pipeline permitting reform, could serve as a relief valve for some of the foreign imports that we're making of LNG to help power areas that might be pipeline constrained or facing unique challenges. Those kinds of one-off situations are things that we've been encouraging the administration to take a look at and potentially look at for maybe some long-term reform as well.
All right, I don't actually see any audience questions yet, and we have just a couple of minutes left, but I'll ask each of you to put on your best prognosticator hats. And what do you see, if anything, coming down the pipeline from Congress this year on the energy front? I know we've talked a lot about some bills that have made their way through committee. There's been a lot of talk about an infrastructure package. Do you see anything getting across the finish line this year, Chet?
Well, again, I would hope so, but certainly, I mean, I'm not overly optimistic that there's enough time, and with the COVID crisis, and then certainly we're in an election year, it seems, the honest answer seems that it would be difficult to see anything major happening in the next few months. But I'm not going to end on that note. I'm going to end on the optimism that, the U.S. Refining kit is the most efficient and effective in the world. We were doing great before COVID. We have hunkered down. We're seeing signs of life come back. We're optimistic that, things are going to start to get better every week after week. I'm hoping when I get off of this conference, I'll see good data coming out of EIA from last week. I expect that we will. And I think we're really well positioned to be strong again, going forward. And longer term, this will be a difficult time we reflect on. But from the fundamental standpoint, there's nothing fundamentally wrong with our sector, right? This is a black swan event, multiple black swan events. And we're going to get through this, and we're going to be strong, and we'll be back.
Nice note. Jeff, what are your thoughts?
again, these bills are teed up, ready to go. It's just a timing issue in terms of what Congress can work on. I mean, there'll be additional appropriations for 2021 that will be voted on in the next few months. And I'm sure some energy, whether it be appropriations or other language, could potentially be attached to there, but it's really just kind of a timing issue right now. However, the administration is still working. They've been putting out, the Department of Energy has been putting out grants and things like that. So, I mean, there's still movement happening. However, like a large energy bill at this time seems unlikely.
Charlie.
I would, I think from a natural gas and LNG perspective, I don't know that we expect a lot to move between now and the end of the year. There's a PHMSA reauthorization out there that we'd like to see happen. There's some specific LNG language in both the House and Senate versions that I think we'd be hopeful would be included in a final version. But like Jeff said, I still think that the agencies that regulate our industry are working, and I would expect that they will continue to keep working. And I do think from a long-term perspective, we're well suited to bounce back and continue to move forward in the manner that we were. The LNG industry was expanding rapidly. I don't expect that to change significantly long-term as a result of the COVID crisis. And I think that you're hearing our members or my members take specific actions to ensure that long-term supply is there, and we do enjoy a very stable regulatory framework that, from a legislative standpoint, there really aren't a lot of fixes that we see, and any of those fixes that we see needing to happen are relatively small as far as impacting our operations. So from a congressional outlook, I don't expect there to be a lot from our industry between now and the end of the year.
All right, well, it looks like unfortunately we are out of time, but thank you all for participating in the panel with me today. And I'd like to thank all of those of you who are watching for joining us as well. Hopefully you found this perspective helpful, and I'll toss it back over to our organizers.
Anthony, thank you for moderating an excellent panel, and thank you to our panelists. You guys did an amazing job giving us a perspective of what we can expect in DC in the coming months. Again, thank you very much for your time and for joining us today. At this time, please help me to welcome Roger Gunther, Executive Director at the Port of Houston. Roger has been the Executive Director since 2014, and he leads one of the nation's largest and busiest ports. Roger, welcome to Texas Energy Day.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of it, and appreciate the Port of Corpus Christi and Sean for letting us join. Again, I'm the Executive Director for Port Houston, and I appreciate to hear all the perspectives today about what's going on in the COVID-19 world in regard to energy, and it's consistent with what we're hearing here in Houston. It seems to be while the president has many challenges and uncertainty, there's this confidence that moving forward, the future of the energy industry is going to lead the recovery. Just a couple of things. It's believed here, and talking to some of our folks here in Houston, that over the next few months, the supply reductions will continue in light of COVID-19, and even mentioned to someone earlier about the Saudi-Russia price wars. But while supply has fallen, there's been some stability in the exports and petchem demand here, namely propane and LPG here in Houston. So we all agree, I believe, that energy will be important in getting the economy back on track. But it's in times like these that when we're facing major disruptive factors, and we've had plenty of different types of factors in our careers, the path ahead may be unclear, and I believe it's both helpful and reassuring to focus on the fundamentals in the larger perspective that we've learned through history. And I can talk about what I know with Port Houston, been there for 30 years, as an example. And to begin with, Houston's synonymous with energy around the world. So people think about what we do, but it's been the building and the growing and maintaining of our ship channel that made our region to make it a major economic engine that it is today. It was partnerships that were established years ago that grew beyond what people imagined in their wildest dreams, as they provide and continue to provide tremendous economic benefits, not only to Houston, but not only to Texas, but to the nation. So, you know, a little bit about Houston. We are top port for exports, helping Texas remain the top exporting state, as you heard. #1 energy port and home to the largest petrochemical manufacturing complex in the nation, if not the world. So, and thanks to the shale revolution that we've seen in recent times, the competitive capabilities of the U.S. petrochemical and oil refining industries have been greatly improved on the global stage. And because of this, more than $250 billion has been invested in and around our region, mainly along the Gulf Coast, and guess what, near our ports here in Texas. So, but while today we're focusing on energy and exports and even imports for refining purposes here, there are other diverse cargoes in our waterway too, and public terminals that we have in the Port of Houston comprise, for instance, the largest container terminal in the U.S. Gulf, and we have the top breakbulk facility in the nation as well. And these modes and these terminals also, you know, are overwhelmingly tied to energy. Just a couple examples: the polymers that are manufactured, that are shipped globally, exported globally, they come from hydrocarbon feedstock. And just to kind of give you an example, 1 in 3 of our export containers, and we do more than 1.5 million export TEUs a year, has some type of plastic resin. So 1/3 of those exports have some type of plastic resin. Import steel for drilling and construction of the plants and refineries come through our port as breakbulk project. And although it's not energy, we can't downplay the impact to our state and nation on the retail goods that are imported as a result of a stable economy provided by the energy sector. So the growth in energy has certainly seen a lot more commerce flowing through our port and you know, our state on the retail side from our consumers. So the activity in the Port of Houston sustains about 3 million jobs itself nationally and provides more than $800 billion in economic revenue. But broaden that further. This is a story of only one port, but in Texas, generally, a lot of Texans don't generally see us as a maritime state. But the fact is, our state is second in the nation as far as total waterborne commerce. In 5 of the Texas ports, top Texas ports, they rank in the 20 busiest ports in the country, which includes, and 3 of them are in the top 10, 3 of us, which includes us and Corpus as a sponsor of this event as well. So here in Texas, our economy relies on global trade. Texas is, again, the largest exporting state in the nation, and it's overwhelmingly tied to energy. So it's that connectivity to the global marketplace. I think Sean mentioned earlier, you know, that's important. The jobs, 2.5 million people in the U.S. are directly employed in oil and gas related, and a total of 10 million directly and indirectly. So the impact is tremendous. And I believe that the recent market events around the coronavirus certainly aren't permanent, as we're hearing. And the world is expected to rapidly return to growth in energy demand, and the U.S. is going to lead us through this and be the pace setter for meeting global demands for a safe, reliable energy supplies. So the fundamentals that we've learned, you know, more than a century ago remain true, that we need the appropriate infrastructure. It's all about infrastructure, and we have to facilitate these economic benefits, and that's still true today. Without our channels, we have a saying, with no channel, you have no port. And with no port, you don't have any commerce, and consequently no jobs and a lower quality of life. So we have to have our port infrastructure able to capture it for now and the future moving forward. But even beyond economic recovery, we need we need to remain competitive. Investment in the ports have to match that investment that we're talking about being made in the energy industry, so that we can move now and when the recovery, which is you know, going to happen fairly quickly, in my opinion. In Houston, we've been working with the Corps for a project to expand our channel. We're working to have a process authorized, and thanks to Senator Cornyn and Senator Cruz, our project has been included in the American Water Infrastructure Act, recently passed out of committee. And we have great support on the House side. You heard from Congresswoman Lizzie Fletcher as well, and our state delegation, and on our T&I bill that'll be coming. So just to wrap up, you know, we're not the only one. Currently, there are 5 channel improvement projects going on in Texas right now that have been authorized and moving forward. Corpus Christi, Freeport, Sabine Neches, Brownsville, and Cedar Bayou. You know, we don't compete collectively in the Texas coast. We need all of them, frankly. And in the role of ports like Port Houston and Port of Corpus Christi, partnership with the Corps of Engineers to facilitate commerce, such as energy and petrochemical products getting to international markets is critical. And as it was a century ago, as it is today, that having the effective, efficient, and safe infrastructure for connectivity to global marketplace is the cornerstone for our recovery and economic growth. So thank you for the little bit of time. And Sean, appreciate you letting us be a part of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. We greatly appreciate all you do for Texas sports through the Texas Port Association and greatly appreciate your time today. Our next speaker is Representative Henry Cuellar from Laredo. His participation is one of incredible importance as Representative Cuellar has been a staunch supporter of funding for the Corpus Christi Ship Channel Improvement Project while serving on the powerful House Appropriations Committee. In addition, his expertise in trade-related issues is of tremendous benefit to our port and the nation as a whole. Welcome, Representative Cuellar, to Texas Energy Day.
Appreciate this call. What I want to do is just briefly go over a couple things and then have y'all continue, because I got more conference calls today than I've had. That as you know, we're going to go back tomorrow to go vote on Friday on CARES Act 2. But I will say that what we're trying to do in the appropriations is on a parallel track. We're still working on the appropriation bills, which is one track. And then, of course, the other one is what we're doing for COVID-19, which is another track. So we're working on parallel tracks on this. And I just wanted to let you know that I was listening to some of your speakers before and what they thought Congress would do. And I have to say, I don't think I disagree with what they were saying on what they were saying. First of all, do we need more infrastructure? Yes, we needed it before COVID-19. Yes, we need it now. Yes, we know that the Russian-Saudi situation affected us here in Texas. Yes, we know that COVID-19 has affected us. So yes, we know Corpus Christi, Houston, other folks need infrastructure, and we're working in a bipartisan way to address those issues, whether it's with Michael Cloud or Lizzie Fletcher, or both of our senators, Cornyn and Cruz. We're working together as a team. I would say that this Friday, as you know, there will be a vote, and I think this is going to be, quite honestly, I think it's going to be not a bipartisan vote, but I think it's going to be what Republicans used to do in the past, Democrats are doing now. That is, they'll pass something on a partisan vote, send it over to the Senate, and then negotiations start at that time. So the bill that you'll see Friday is probably a first step to what the final bill is going to look at. I will be supporting it, even though I do have some questions about some of it, but we will continue moving the process moving forward. Are we going to see a highway bill? We're going to see a water bill? I hope we do. I used to say that, how do we pay for it? But as you know, we're now on this particular year, we are going to be $4 or $5 trillion in the deficit. So I think we can try to find the money, hopefully, to do a highway bill. We are going to do a water bill, and hopefully we will do a highway bill also. Regarding some of the legislation, I don't know if you heard from Lizzie Fletcher already, but I'm working with her on the reserve. A piece of legislation with Steve Scalise also on the SBR. So we're working on that. So different bills out there to address the oil and gas industry. Bottom line is on the oil and gas industry, we do need infrastructure. We needed it before, we needed it after. There's a couple of things we can help with. I still say that the most important thing that we probably did in decades was back in 2015 when Joe Hart and myself lifted the ban on oil exports. And I still remember the first oil came in from the Eagle Ford in my area, went up to Corpus Christi. And then I believe it was in December of 2015 when we lifted this. A little bit after that, you saw the first export, and we've done what's happened with Corpus Christi since. So the lifting of the ban of the oil exports was key to the oil and gas industry. We are facing some obstacles now, but I feel very strongly that we'll be able to address this issue. Right now, we're working, Will Hurd and myself are working on addressing some of the supply chains between the U.S. and Mexico. As you know, what's an essential business in the U.S. side and what's an essential business on the Mexican side needs a little bit more coordination. So we did send off a letter yesterday to both Secretary Pompeo and Secretary Marcelo Ebrard in Mexico to address this, working with the Border Trade Alliance and working with the U.S. Chamber. We put some recommendations. So there's a lot of things going on, and I just want to say to all of y'all, thank you for working together. And I hopefully look forward to seeing you in person, hopefully very soon. I know we've been working with Corpus Christi and other folks. As you know, my hometown, Laredo, has surpassed LA. I don't know if LA went back again, but Laredo became, I think for the second time, the #1 port in the country, surpassing LA. We still are facing issues, where some of the trade has lowered down by 10% in the Laredo area, but we still are looking at trade. And I know it comes out of Laredo, feeds Corpus Christi, feeds Houston and other areas, not only seaports, but land ports. So we're working with our folks in Mexico to address some of those issues. So thank you very, very much. I'll continue working with Lizzie and with my friend Michael and our senators to address some of the issues that I know are important to the ports. I always say to the ports, whether it's Corpus Christi or Brownsville or Houston or wherever it might be, we shouldn't see this as competition. There's enough business for everybody, and we should be working together as a region. And I think if we take that approach, we'll be able to get more funding to our particular regions on that. So thank you, and appreciate it.
Thank you, Representative Cuellar. We appreciate your support throughout the years. At this time, I'd like to welcome Senator Ted Cruz. Senator Cruz, much like Senator Cornyn, has been a huge supporter of the Port of Corpus Christi and all Texas ports for that matter, and has been an integral in many of the foreign policy matters that protect our nation. His support of the energy industry during this public health crisis ensures America Energy remains a strength for our country. Senator Cruz, welcome to Texas Energy Day.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to join you today, and thank you for the terrific work each of you are doing at the Port of Corpus Christi, the Port of Houston, driving so much commerce through our state and for our country. We are deeply appreciative. As every one of you knows, these are extraordinary times. We are facing challenges unlike any we've ever seen. In Texas, we have 3 simultaneous crises playing out all at once. We have number 1, a public health crisis. The coronavirus pandemic, it is serious. It has taken over 250,000 lives worldwide. And we have taken extraordinary steps to flatten the curve, to slow the rates of transmission of the disease, and to keep people safe. Secondly, we're facing an economic crisis, and the economic crisis is staggering in its scope. We have right now over 34 million Americans who have lost their jobs just in the last 2 months. That's 20% of the nation's workforce unemployed in 60 days. We're seeing millions of small businesses on the verge of going bankrupt. We're seeing people's life savings destroyed. This is staggering. This is crushing. And all of this economic downturn is the direct consequence, the direct result of government policies that have been put in place to try to defeat the pandemic. And then third, in Texas in particular, we're facing an energy crisis, an oil and gas crisis. At the exact same time as this global pandemic was playing out, we saw both Saudi Arabia and Russia take advantage of the crisis, flood the global market with oil, and cause prices to collapse. That combined with unprecedented demand destruction, with the economy freezing in place, the consumption of oil and gas dropped precipitously. That has had a crushing impact on the state of Texas. It threatens potentially millions of jobs across the state of Texas. I can tell you in the last 3 months, virtually every waking moment I have spent focused on these three crises. We need to solve, we need to defeat all three of them. When it comes to the pandemic, we need to continue focusing on sound science, on using protective equipment, on social distancing. We need to continue investing in testing. I will say the rates of testing have risen dramatically, and we've seen real success in terms of flattening the curve and slowing the rates of transmission. And we need to continue accelerating research both for treatments for COVID-19 and for a vaccine and ultimately for a cure. And I have been working with the administration, pressing the administration to streamline the regulatory process to expedite that as fast as possible. When it comes to the economic challenges, I think we need to make a major priority getting the economy moving again. Texans want to get back to work. Texans are hurting and are eager to get back to work. Now, we want to do so safely. We're not interested in being rash or foolish. Everyone is interested in staying safe and protecting our loved ones. But what we're seeing in Texas, what we're seeing across the country, is that we are moving gradually and in a sensible way back to reopening the economy. And that, I think that has to vary geographically, depending on the facts on the ground, depending on sound science. New York City, for example, the infection rates there have been truly horrific. Nobody would argue that New Yorkers should go back to work tomorrow. But other parts of the country, the infection rates are much lower. In the state of Texas, we've had roughly 1,100 fatalities in the state of Texas. That is 1,100 too many. We grieve for those lives. But at 29 million people, our infection rates and fatality rates are much, much lower than many other parts of the country. And so the state of Texas, as you know, is in the process of opening up, doing so county by county on a regional basis, and doing so in a way that respects and follows sound science. And so exercising social distancing, using reasonable steps to slow and mitigate the rate of transmission, but at the same time, allowing people to go to work and provide for their families, and allowing the incredible engine of American free enterprise to turn around this economic catastrophe. The third crisis, oil and gas and energy, I've spent an enormous amount of time on. I have been speaking repeatedly with senior officials in Saudi Arabia in particular. There are a total of 13 senators that we have banded together on this issue. We're all from major energy producing states. All 13 of us have historically been allies of Saudi Arabia when it came to national security and foreign policy. And I'll tell you, we have leaned in hard with the Saudis against what they were doing. I had a couple of weeks ago spent an hour and a half on the phone with the Saudi energy minister, telling him, frankly, and the Saudi ambassador, that what they were doing was completely unacceptable, and it was devastating to jobs throughout the state of Texas. Their response was essentially, but Russia, to which I responded, I don't give a damn about Russia. Russia is our enemy. They behave like our enemy, and we treat them like our enemy. You're supposed to be our friend. If you want us to treat you like Russia, we can, but you don't get to pretend to be our friend, to seek our military help, to seek our national security help, to seek our foreign policy help in the Middle East, and then at the same time deliberately exploit a global pandemic to try to destroy millions of jobs in Texas and across the country. I think the Saudis heard that message loud and clear. I've also spoken with President Trump repeatedly about this, went up to DC and joined him in the Oval Office with CEOs of major energy companies, where the president has been leaning in hard, particularly with Saudi Arabia, with Russia as well. And we saw OPEC Plus announce that they had retreated from their proposal to flood the market with oil and instead are restricting their production. That has helped some. That has driven prices up a little bit. We saw horrifically where prices went negative nearly to $40 a barrel. Beyond that, what I've been heavily focused on is ensuring access to capital for energy producers, particularly small independents in Texas. Ensuring access to capital. You know, we've seen Wall Street cutting off energy and oil and gas in particular, and my concern is in the face of this crisis that too many banks will use this as an opportunity to rebalance their portfolio and essentially to make huge equity calls on small Texas producers, which will bankrupt most, if not all, of the Texas independents. If the capital is called at current prices, that has the potential to devastate Texas independents. And it is the independents who have done the heavy lifting, driving in the last decade Texas and America to be energy independent, to America becoming the #1 producer of oil in the world, the #1 producer of gas in the world. Obviously, both Corpus Christi and Houston, the ports are massive export terminals. In fact, Houston and Corpus Christi go back and forth for the #1 export terminal of oil in the world. Both are fantastic. That's a great competition. I'd like to see both ports blow away their records going forward, but we've got to make sure that we continue the domestic production and have access to capital. And so I've been working very closely. I advised the president that the administration needed to lean in vigorously on access to capital, and the president asked me to work with Steven Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, and Dan Brouillette, the Energy Secretary, to work with the bank regulators to make sure that capital is not cut off for oil and gas. Not only that, the Federal Reserve, I urged them to change their Main Street lending facility that they had announced. Congress, we appropriated $450 billion to the Federal Reserve, which they're levering up 10x to $4.5 trillion to provide liquidity throughout the market. But the rules they had laid out for the Main Street lending facility improperly made it not appropriate and not useful for energy. And the date they had set to measure solvency of recipients was a date after oil prices had collapsed because of the coronavirus pandemic. And so I urged them, move that date back 2 weeks earlier so you can ensure you're lending to solvent companies. We don't want to lend to fiscally irresponsible companies, but this lending facility is designed to respond to the emergency, the crisis of the pandemic. And so the timing should reflect before the coronavirus pandemic crushed the markets. I said, secondly, for most producers in Texas, particularly the small independents, that they rely on debt leveraging. That leveraging is redetermined periodically, typically every 6 months. And so in order to survive, because the redeterminations could bankrupt them all, they have to be able to replace existing debt. The initial rules the Fed had come out with said that recipients could not replace existing debt. I pointed out that meant for the energy sector, this liquidity was not going to be terribly useful. The Federal Reserve changed their policies on both their regards. After I sent the letter, they adopted both of the changes I suggested. I think that will be helpful in ensuring some liquidity so that Texas energy producers can survive. That being said, these remain very challenging times for oil and gas. And the biggest challenge to energy right now is demand. We've got to get the economy moving again. We got to get people driving their cars, driving their trucks, flying on jet airplanes. Until demand comes back, energy is going to be in a world of hurt, and the state of Texas is going to be hurting. And so I'm focusing on getting the economy moving again and doing so consistent with sound science in a way that keeps all of us safe.
Thank you, Senator Cruz. We appreciate all you do for Texas, Texas ports, and the oil and gas industry. This concludes.
Thank you, guys. God bless.
Thank you, Senator. This concludes Texas Energy Day. A huge thank you to our sponsors, the Natural Gas Supply Association, ClearPath, American Fuel Petrochemical Manufacturers. In addition, I would like to thank Jerry Sullivan and his team at Edelman, Nelda Olivo and Adriana Escamilla with the Port of Corpus Christi, and Charles Briddenham, our DC consultant. We hope to replicate this event next year in DC, but with all of us in attendance. Thank you again and stay safe.